Hello, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gormally and this is my channel, Hometown Chess Hero. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about luck in chess. What constitutes luck in chess? Am I a lucky player? I don't think I am a particularly lucky player. So remember when we talked about Fernandez, I said he had, I think something like 16 comeback wins, which is a very high number. And let me just cover this. And okay, so yeah, but I only had about 9 out of 60 games where I had comeback wins. So I looked at some of my games from the year 2000. This is where I played this game against Mark Hebden in the Isle of Man. And I had, quite a few draws. I had a higher percentage of draws than Fernandez, but I also had less wins. I think I had about 19 wins in that period, and Fernandez had about 32 wins in the period that I took for him, which was around about 2023. So around about this time, the games I took were from 2000. So it was quite a long time ago. But I was playing at quite a reasonable level. I was already rated about 2,500. I think I actually got over 2,500 in this tournament. So this tournament was played in Port Erin in the Isle of Man. And I can't remember if Mark won the tournament. I think Mark won one of these big tournaments around about this time. There were some good players playing in these tournaments like Sergei Volkov. So obviously the Isle of Man tournament now is a very strong tournament, but even back in the day, 20 odd years ago, it was still quite a decent tournament. There were some pretty decent players. So obviously Isle of Man is kind of like a tax haven. So they've got a little bit of extra money. They can sort of bring in these good players. I remember going there on the ferry. I think I got the ferry there from memory. We got the ferry back, but the ferry we got back was like a bigger ferry. Because it was like the ferry to Haitian, because the smaller ferry got cancelled because of the weather. But yeah, so you play on the Isle of Man. It's a beautiful place. If you've never been to the Isle of Man, it's a beautiful place. There's this island. There's this mountain called Snarfell. You can get a mountain railway up there. That's why I had a panic attack. I had to get off before the summit. But that's a kind of like a volcanic mountain essentially, and beautiful kind of rugged countryside. It's a very nice place. There's like a walk up this tower. I think it's called something like the Brisley Tower, but I'm not certain. So it's quite near the hotel. You'd turn right at the hotel, and then you keep walking. And then you walk along, and then you walk up, and then there's like this Brisley Tower. If you keep walking up to like the cliff, very nice place. You get very nice views of the surrounding kind of land. There's a sea, obviously. And yeah, some round I played Mark Hebden, and I remember around about this time, I met the snooker player Willie Ford very briefly, because he was there to do he was there for some reason or other, and he went into the bar and said, "Oi, hey Willie, like, and so he sort of way back sort of thing, but yeah, he probably was a little bit embarrassed by my drunken behaviour, and I was probably drunk because I was celebrating because I just got over 2,500 for the first time, I think. So that was part of the whole thing about getting to GM. And Willie unfortunately died a few years ago. So he was a little bit like me. He was a bit of a kind of a gambling addict, and did like a sort of like a bum career, like a snooker bum rather than a chess bum. So we had quite a lot in common. But yeah, let's have a look at this game against Mark Hebden. He's always been a tough opponent for me over the years, and I think around about this time I had a good score against Mark. But in more recent years, the score has gone the other way. And I remember Mark did say to me that he was trying too hard to beat me in the early part of his career. And, the early part of when we played. Because obviously by the time I played him, he was already quite advanced into his career, right? So he was always... So when I played him in first time I ever played Mark was in 1996 in a rapid play before the British Championships, and he beat me. But I think he lost to Michael Adams in the same tournament. So Michael Adams turned out. He didn't play in the main tournament, which sadly was the top seed, but Chris Ward ended up winning. But he played a rapid play. The reason he didn't play the main tournament was because I think they didn't meet his fee or the sponsorship hadn't arrived yet. He then played the next year, when he was in Hove, when the sponsorship from Smith and Williamson arrived and they could meet his fee. But he didn't play in the main tournament. But Michael Adams won a rapid play, but I played Mark in that same rapid play. That was the first time I ever played Mark, and he beat me in a barrier attack. But then after that, my score against him started getting better. I think he was trying too hard to beat me. He worked out the best way to sort of play against me was just to try and keep the game tight at the back. And, you know, technically he's probably a slightly superior player than me overall. So in endgame play, a little bit like when I played Keith, he's probably technically slightly superior. So when it gets very murky and, you know, very attacking, then maybe I've got a good chance. But if it starts to get technical, then maybe I'm not quite as good. So that is, yeah, so that's why his score against me started to improve. He worked out the best way to play against me, and his score against me started to improve. But in this game, it would turn out to be a very tough struggle. And I played this move D5. And funny enough, I think I had a recent game against Michael Adams, a very similar kind of variation, where he was black against me. It shows how poor my theory is, because I couldn't remember the nuances of why black goes D5 here, or whether black goes C6. Black can also go C6 here, I believe. That's also a theoretical line. But D5 is another move. I believe there is a possibility of going knight E5 here immediately is another option. But white took, which is very solid. And then he's just going for something very simple, which is fair enough. But it doesn't feel like the most testing way for white to play. I think C6 is actually a fairly decent move by me. So I'd say already at this stage of the game, black has equalised the game. Rook C8 was played. Again, very natural move. Bishop H3. Yeah, I remember when Mark played this move, Bishop H3. I might have flipped the board actually and have a look, you know, talk about from my perspective. I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I thought like this guy's a very good positional player. He's played his move Bishop H3. It's not clear what my plan is. I'd say there's a difference between like now, the way I approach chess and the way I approached chess at that time. So you're talking 23 years ago, was that I'm probably slightly more objective now. Compared to where I was then. You know, I was probably, you know, my opinion of positions was maybe a little bit extreme at times. You know, I'd look at it and say, like now I would probably realise the position's dead equal, right? And there's probably lots of ways that black can play which are fine. And at the time, probably felt like it was a lot worse than it actually was. So there's pros and cons of having, you know, each approach. If you've got this approach where you're very concerned, then you've got this high kind of, you know, sense of danger. On the other hand, if you're very objective and you're very, you know, unconcerned, or you don't fear ghosts, then that's probably a more ideal way to approach the game. But in any case, I'm waffling a little bit. What's the move for black? I played the move C5, which feels like a reasonable move. Although it doesn't necessarily deal with his idea of maybe putting a knight on E5. Well, actually, knight E5 at the moment will walk into CD. So how did Mark play? He played Queen B2, which is, again, very good move. Putting the queen out of danger line. You don't want that queen. So he clearly wants to play a move like knight E5 eventually, but he doesn't want to run into CD with a pin along the C file. So a move that black would like to play here is knight E4, but the problem is that runs into knight takes D5. So what should black play here? Moves like rook E8 are possible. You'd like to play rook C7, so probably during the game I would like to play rook C7 to break that pin. But the problem is that will run into bishop F4. So what did I play? I just took, which is fairly reasonable. And then I went bishop c5. So I think I handled this part of the game reasonably well. Not a terrible move, bishop c5 by any means. He went knight a4. I went rook e8. And he went bishop g5. Again, decent positional move. I went rook c7. Yes, again, I want to break that pin. So yeah, I remember thinking in the game, I felt quite uncomfortable here. I felt like he was starting to get the better of the game. You know, there's ideas of taking on d7, and if rook takes, then knight c6 was an option. But yeah, I didn't see a clear win for him or a clear big advantage. So, yeah, and he took, which I think actually at the time it kind of slightly surprised me. But his idea was to go knight f5, and very sensible idea to use the square, and effectively he's got the bishop pair. He's got a lot of pressure on the king's side. Very clear what white is intending to do. Looks like a very good position for white. But I went rook c6, which wasn't bad. And it does look very tempting to play b4 here because you're breaking black's control over d4 square. And white did indeed play the move b4. So I went rook b6. And he went a3, which again, very sensible. I went h6. He came back. So he could have potentially taken, but I don't think that would have given white any edge whatsoever. You just stay back the knight. So he went bishop f4. I played knight f8, which again, probably not such a bad move. He went rook c1. I went knight e6 again. Yeah, decent move. He went bishop e5. Looks normal. I went knight g5. Bishop c8. Knight h4. Yeah, I think actually maybe it was here that I should have actually pushed and gone for this move d4. So the funny thing about this game is that both players were slightly unlucky in the sense that I was possibly doing very well at this point in the game. And then later Mark was winning. And neither of us quite showed enough technique to kind of, you know, bring the point home sort of thing. And the threat now is to go queen d5 maybe, and then line up a bishop b7. Is this the right position where... Yeah, d4. So in my notes I said d4. Very thematic move. And now this idea of knight g5 is coming with a lot more power because the queen has been cut off from d4. Now in these queen's gambit positions, or queen's Indian I should say, positions, very, very similar. A lot of Nimzos, Queen's Indians, you know, Queen's Gambit, decline kind of positions can be quite similar. This idea of going d4 is quite thematic for black because you're gaining space. You're lining up for, you know, often the bishop would already be on that long diagonal. Here it's on a6, which isn't ideal, but it's not easy for white either because that queen is a little bit in the foreign line. He'd like to be able to take on c5 and then undermine my control, undermine my defence of the d4 pawn, but he can't do that at the moment. He's going to have to waste a move to move out of that. And the problem is he can't really move the queen at the moment because if he makes a move like queen c2, that will run into knight g5. And there's other ways to go wrong here for white. For example, if you take go e3, that will run into knight g5. And black is doing very well indeed. You know, what do you do about the bishop? If the bishop goes to g2, I'm going to simply win a piece. If the bishop goes to g4, there's h5, I believe. Also winning material. If you take there, I guess I can just take here, right? And then take, and then it looks like I'm doing well. You still can't take this pawn with either way because you're pinned both ways. And if you check, I go to h7. So you could have a lot variation like this. You know, if white was trying to be tricky, I guess you could play this, but it still doesn't look enough. Probably a move like g6 will be sufficient, if nothing else. There might well be something stronger here, like knight h3, for example. Knight h3 looks very strong, because where does the king go? If it goes to h1, there's queen c6 check, or bishop b7 check. If it goes to g2, you've still got moves like bishop b7 or queen c6. But you could even simply play a move like g6 here, and you'd be doing very well, because if the knight moves, then knight h3 is going to come with even more power, because I'm going to hit f2 as well. So I think when I check this, I mean, a lot of this is engine analysis, I'm sorry to say. That after the move d4, the best move is f4. But I'll be honest with you, I doubt Mark would have played f4, because it just looks like such an unnatural move to play that move. Such a difficult move to find. You're weakening your king. Yeah, you are defending e5, but now you're kind of going to be walking into bishop e7, queen d5 moves. I'll be surprised. But obviously he's a very strong player, Mark. He could find f4. If f4 is the only way for white to play, I think f4, the engine gives us the only way to avoid white being in big trouble. Obviously you say like he's a good player, he may well find f4, you know. Like as a GM, you have to be flexible in your thought process. You know, would Magnus Carlsen find f4? Probably he would. But not certain. It's not certain, you know. But anyway, in the game that didn't happen because I played a move knight g5. That was a mistake. And then I played another mistake. I went bishop c8. Apparently I should go queen d7. Bishop c8 was quite a bad move. You know, why am I taking a bishop away from an active position just to create a one move threat? You know, a lot of the decisions I look at now, when I played in the early part of my career, and I'm like, why on earth did I play that move? You know, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I think part of the reason I didn't really improve as much as possible I could have done, certainly around about that period, I kind of stagnated for a number of years. It wasn't until 2005, 2006 that I got the GM title and went up to 2570 for a short period before falling back down again. But I think part of the reason where I probably could have kicked on in this period, at least got to 2530, 2540, I think that would have been very manageable at that time. But there wasn't enough navel gazing. I didn't put my games to rigorous analysis. I didn't study chess. You know, I would turn up at these tournaments, you know, oh, I'm brilliant, I'm playing the Isle of Man this week. Brilliant, yeah, 10 days of, you know, sitting around drinking and, you know, when I could be going after it, I could really be studying chess deeply, lining up these tournaments abroad and, you know, really going after it. I had the energy levels at that time and I wasn't doing that. So I went bishop c8, Mark played knight h4, and I went knight h3. So I'll quickly show you how the game finished. So at this point in time, I think white is doing very well indeed. I went g5, kind of partly out of desperation because knight f4 was clearly a threat. And that was a big threat. He went f3, that's an excellent move. Yeah, I think queen d4 was not a bad move, but I think, yeah, when I analysed it with the computer, it was suggesting knight f2, which I think was practically a better move. I think if you keep the knight against the bishop, you look at that black king, and there could be issues later. Let's say the bishop was to move from f5, then knight g4 might become an issue. In any case, I think white can very easily consolidate here and win with the extra pawn. But he went queen d4. Now, yeah, I think this is where I started to show maybe that I do have something in the sense of I'm quite resilient in bad positions and can be quite tough to put away. So the reason that Mark, I think he could have played queen d2 and retained 2 extra pawns. I'm not sure, but no, but then it would lose a3, right? So he's playing aggressively. This is Mark, the way Mark plays. He plays what he considers to be the best moves. You know, he's a principled player. He's a principled person. he will try to play the best moves. I'm not quite sure why I didn't take on e2. That looks like... Oh, if I take on e2, he will take twice and go rook d8. Right, so that was what he was angling for. So I took on f3, he took back. And now, of course, I'm forced to come back, otherwise there's rook d8. So at this point, I think white is winning or close to winning. But this was a comeback. This was a lucky game from me from this point on, because I probably should have lost the game. And there were a few technical games later on in our clashes with Mark where he did put me away, but this wasn't one of them. So maybe I was a better player at that point, or he worked out better ways to try and beat me. Yeah, I think here I should have apparently gone queen a5. That was a better defense. Queen e6 was quite a bad move. And yeah, it was only rook f2 that was quite a serious error. So rook f2, the tendency is to kind of tidy up there for white. You're playing rook f2, you're tidying up, and you think, well, this should be enough because I've got queen a7 coming. But that was actually quite a bad move by white, throwing the win away, funny enough. So what should he have played instead? He should have played, in this position, the move queen c2, kind of counterintuitive. So put the queen away from the aggressive position on c5 and just put it back there. But the idea is you're going to slowly, you know, this is what, when you're trying to defend a position, this is what you don't want. You want clarification. You want your opponent to go down a forcing line. You don't want them to slowly play the position slowly. This is probably what I was dreading. That he's, you know, going to do this and then he's going to very slowly advance a4, a5. And there's no clear way for black to actually defend this position. There's no clear way for black to clarify the position. So queen c2 would have been a very classy move if white, not obvious, doesn't look obvious to me at all. But also some of the endgames can be better. For example, if I played queen a1, maybe if he goes queen b2 there, the endgame's better because the rook isn't already on e3. So the reason why rook f2 was quite a bad move and allowed me to get a lucky draw was because the star move queen e3. And that was a good move. It was probably my best move of the whole game. Well, if I found d4, that would have been the best move. If I found d4 earlier, that would have been the best move. But queen e3 was a star move. So the idea is, you know, why is that such a good move? Well, the point is now the endgame, which we got, is not winning for white. Because I managed to get my rook very active and tie his rook down to a certain extent. So I'm looking at this now and I'm wondering why Mark didn't play queen b4. So what's wrong with queen b4? And maybe I was dreading that in the game. There must be, maybe it's queen e1. Let's just check. What is wrong with queen b4? It's not a bad try actually. Maybe that would have been a better practical try. Just keep the queens on. But apparently you can just go here. Now if he goes back there. Yeah, so he could go queen b2 and just play. That's probably what Magnus Carlsen would have done, and I would have eventually gone wrong. Although Magnus is very good at rook and pawn endgame, so he might have been tempted to go into this. You're a pawn up, you know, it's a free punt, right? And but I actually, for once, I actually defended the endgame pretty well. F5 was a good move, just trying to clarify the position. Mark is very good at rook and pawn endgames. If I'd have given him a chance, he would have won. I don't think he's ever really studied rook and pawn endgames, but he's just very, very good at finding little tactical tricks to kind of, you know, technique is a lot about tactics. So finding little tactical tricks to kind of frustrate the opponent, annoy the opponent, you know, make progress in the winning in the winning process. But here, I don't think there's enough for white. I don't think black has any issues. It's fairly standard draw position. He is a pawn out. If he went rook b8, I think you can go. Maybe just king g7. Actually, what was wrong with rook b8? My analysis is terrible. So let's. Yeah, king g7, and you're not worried about this because he would just lose the b pawn, right? Exactly. Yeah, and he can't really get his king active because after rook b5, king g4, you'd like to play, but then there's rook b4, and if king f5, you go rook f4. You have, yeah. So like here, very important move, rook b4 check, which he would have seen in the game. King f5, and very important move that actually this is really a bad move because king h5, rook h7. But in fact, you're now in trouble because you're actually a lot worse in this, probably losing in this rook and pawn. Interesting. That white is actually losing that rook and pawn despite being level material. So, but none of that happened in the game. He actually just decided to let me win the b pawn. He realised that that wouldn't have been winning if he kept the b pawn. So he went for a position where he's got the extra pawn, but it's not winning because it's the h pawn. And I've got the rook behind the pawn. And again, any moves like king g4 just going to run into rook h4 check. So I'm controlling the game fairly well. So I'm actually quite pleased with the way I drew this game from a difficult. It was a good save, you know, and that's a very important part of chess. That you have to have that ability to save games where you're under the back foot. So in that sense, I did a good job of being a lucky player. I was a resilient player. You know, I showed some resilience in this game. And that's an important part of why I became a GM eventually, because I showed some resilience. So now let's have a quick look at a game where I was actually winning. We're going to very quickly get to the winning position. I was playing a guy called Sergei Besakov, who's from Russia. And a little bit of a, I'd say, had one or two unpleasant run-ins with the guy. I mean, he had a slightly suspicious reputation. Well, not suspicious, but, you know, there were like one or two stories about him getting into fights and stuff. Then again, I've done similar stuff myself, but I remember him being a little bit rude to Neil McDonald once when we played Capel, which I didn't like, because Neil's a nice guy. But he's a decent player. Sergei Besakov is a GM. And I went here. And yeah, quite... yeah, F5 was played, F3. And he went... No, hang on. Yeah. This is a position. So the computer here actually gives it as slightly better. I mean, clearly better for white, but it's actually winning on a higher depth. I think if you've analysed this position, it's actually winning. So you might want to pause the computer at this point and say, you know, what is the winning method for white? So white to play, what is the best way to continue? Now, I've already shown you what I played in the game, F3. That was not the correct move. What's the best way to continue? Okay, so I'll show you what white should have done, what I should have done. And I think the reason I didn't find this was because there was a lack of calculation and there was a lack of self-belief. And I think to be a lucky player is partly from the winning aspect as well. And, you know, there was almost like I didn't really believe that I was winning or you know, I wasn't careful enough in the calculation. Because in this point, or, you know, I didn't understand all the details of the position well enough. You know, and I didn't consider, look, if I go there, very concrete analysis. A lot of winning technique is concrete analysis, right? You know, you're going from A to B. You know, if I go F3, where he goes F4 and Queen D2, and he's got enough counterplay. I should have realised that in the game. I was strong enough to realise that. What I could have played, for example, the move A4 immediately is also very strong. But I could have actually played amazing move B4. Now, the reason that works is after rook B4, you simply go A4. Double exclam. You give back a pawn. And the reason is you now have complete coordination of the position Although the engine actually says that white is not that much better. I think on a higher depth it would say that white is a lot better. But we could get a line like this and rook a1. And yeah, it doesn't, I must admit, it doesn't look that easy to win. But I think, you know, this is a moment where I really should have gone into the tank and really thought about the position and really thought like really hard. I think I understood that this was a crucial moment to some extent, but maybe not enough. And I really should have, you know, or my calculation just wasn't good enough to actually get to the move b4. And even a move like a4 is also very good, right? Immediately. It's very important to just get these pawns going as quickly as possible. Use that extra material on the queen side. Even if it means giving back a pawn, it's very important to get this attack going on the queen side. Instead, I played a very limp move f3. And then after queen d2, it's very hard now for white to win the game. Because he's now threatening rook c8 to rook c2. With a lot of counterplay, and he went rook c8, rook d1, queen e2, and I decided just to repeat the game, and we made a draw. But that was a disappointing draw because that was an opportunity to win that game. So yeah, so I think a lot of winning technique is about self-belief. It's about calculation, it's about understanding the moment, you know, it's about how much training you've done at home on your calculation. But am I a lucky player? I think the answer is not really. I'm kind of in the middle. I have moments where I'm lucky and I'm quite resilient. But overall, I'm not as lucky as maybe some players who really stand out in that regard. I'm kind of semi-lucky. So the final answer is no, I'm not a lucky player.